our family is on the biggest project we've ever taken on in aviation. We're not restoring, not upgrading, we're building an airplane. I'm an AMP with IA privileges, and I've spent several years working on aircraft built by others. But this is new territory. Every rivet, every decision, we're learning as we go. This isn't just about the airplane. It's about pushing my maintenance skills further than I ever have before. And I have enjoyed bringing you along for the entire build. So today, let's jump into the control sticks and the floorboards on my Bearhawk Companion. There are parts of building an airplane, like hanging the wings or hanging an engine, that feel big. Today's is not that. Today, all I'm doing is I'm installing the control stick and the floorboards for my Bearhawk Companion. I've actually got them back out now, except for the one under the control stick, because it's kind of got to be there. But these little items can be the most critical ones. And on top of that, this feels like an airplane now. Like, I've got a control stick in here. As of last time, I had the flaps set up. So it's pretty awesome to actually see the shell of what will be an airplane. So let's jump into how to do these floor panels and how to set this control sticks, and unfortunately just some dumb mistakes I make along the way. But this is amazing because this really starts to look like an aircraft today. So instead of doing B-roll audio on this one, I actually want to show how to assemble and install this control stick assembly. From what I've seen online, there are some good videos out there. I know Colby has one, but it's hard to find information about assembling this control rod setup. So I kind of just want to explain each component here, maybe a little bit more than an overview like I've been doing on these systems, just because it's more critical, plus there are some special things with this. First, you're going to have a control rod arm, which is this component right here. Inside of each end here will be your actual control sticks. So these will go with the point facing forwards. And then inside of the tube itself, there's a connecting rod. So that connecting rod will go in the tube itself. If you've got the plans, this is relatively easy to understand, but there is two holes on each side of this connecting rod. The inside inboard hole is for the base of this control stick. The outboard is going to be your aileron shackle connection, or where you're going to Nyco press the fitting to the cable for the aileron that'll run out and then up the struts. First off, I cut all the bushings loose and made sure I did not lose any of those. They're extremely small, so you do not want to inadvertently lose them. Then I took a drill bit and I chased all of the holes for the hardware to deburr them. Now, in reality, I'm just getting the paint out of here, but this drill bit, while it does work, and I have used it multiple times, I end up buying deburring tools this day for 3/16, quarter, and 5/16 hardware. When they end up showing up, it makes this process so much easier to get these components to align and the hardware to slip in. So I highly recommend just going ahead and getting some. I think it was like less than 30 bucks or so from Spruce, and it just made your life a whole lot easier. Once I had everything roughly aligned and inserted, I went ahead and took the sticks over to our vise across the hanger and press those bushings into place. In hindsight, I should have done that before I did this step right here. So just make sure that you're thinking about that and that you get those bushings pressed in place prior to trying to assemble the whole thing. I could have pulled it apart, but it was such a headache to put it together because I didn't have a deburring tool that I just went ahead and did it. Next, I end up installing the AN3 bolts that go through the bottom of the control stick, and these have a castle nut on them because it is a pivoting joint. So I go ahead and put all that hardware in. They are on the inside of the control arms. The outsides will be where the actual cable itself attaches. In a much later video, really during final assembly, when I am assembling the entire aircraft and finally attaching the cables. Next, I found the pulleys that are associated with the aileron cables. I know I've showed you this in a previous video, but here I'm actually installing these and putting them into the slot that they belong, they will end up routing the cable up through the strut as it goes into the wing. If you're interested in seeing how I route that, please take a look back at my aileron video, as it shows that entire setup, even though I haven't done that process quite yet. The next part was actually positioning this aileron control tube in the correct location. That's why I have these pulleys in place. I got 2 clamps and then made sure that that push-pull tube at the bottom of the control sticks was oriented in line with these pulleys. That's why I'm going to run the string kind of up and over the aircraft to make sure that on both sets of pulleys the string looks like it is mostly aligned with that stick at the bottom. It's kind of the pivot point for the system, and so I wanted to make sure that there was no side loads that I could minimize across that pulley. I will say that using the clamps made this a whole lot easier because it allowed me to fine tune on both sides, make sure that they were relatively aligned, sort of look at everything, and then make the decision on where to cut the holes for that control stick. I'm sure there's easier ways to do this, but with the clamps on the front, I pilot drilled the aft holes, and then I took a step bit and actually drilled them to their final 3/16 or -3 size. At that point, I took a bolt and put it into the hole to make sure that the aft end of the control stick was in place before I marked and cut through the front side of that. So, obviously I'm removing and installing a couple times here, but that's the best way I know of making sure this gets as square as possible and it's in the correct orientation as well as alignment. Alright, so I have made my life significantly harder than it needed to be. I forgot to install the bell crank like an absolute moron. So I'm going to polish the inside of this. This is different than a 5 or I think a Patrol or LSA. The Companion uses what appears to be just like a metal bushing. There is no bearing inside of this like there is on the 5. Like if you watch Colby's video on this, he has a bushing he presses in here. I do not. I have just this metal bushing that slides in between these 2 spots right here. So you can see this is where that bushing goes, and this is where that bell crank will end up sitting. So that's what I got to do now. I use 320 grit sandpaper, and at this moment I was using the punch that I've been using, my auto punch, to ream out these holes just to sand them out. It's too big to use a drill bit, as well as I don't even think I could get my drill inside that area under the seats to drill it out. So I use sandpaper to smooth that up, and then following the plans, which by the way, what I'm doing right here, all of this is listed in the legacy manuals that you can find under the Bearhawk's resource tab online. It's free. You can be looking at this right now, even if you're just considering building this aircraft. Now this plan set that I'm looking at, that came with the kit. So I'm notating what hardware I'm using, I'm notating any changes, and I've actually started writing the exact hardware that I used on this plan sheet just for the end when I'm finally putting together my spreadsheet on everything that was used on my aircraft. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in a future video. But here I assemble up the connection rod that goes between the control stick and that bell crank. This bell crank is going to have a cable on the top and the bottom, and that is going to be what actuates my elevator. So it's a push-pull system that then will pull the cables that will be attached to the elevator, which we'll be doing after we get the aircraft on its gear. I then marked that bushing material because it is longer than it needs to be, removed it from the aircraft, and took it and cut it off with a Sawzall. I used the vise to hold this to make sure I did not lose it or hurt myself in the process of doing it, and once I removed it, then I just sanded the end off to more or less deburr it. I don't really show it here, but I put a little bit of oil on that when I slid it back in just for lubrication, because there's not a lubrication port on that unit. So it is just bare metal rubbing on bare metal inside of that bushing. Most people use a 3/8 inch bolt for securing this to the aircraft. I'm just using a cotter pin here. I probably am upsizing that at some point and putting a bolt in it. I don't have one ordered from Spruce yet. So that's likely something I am going to do just for the extra added security of having it. Then I went ahead and put some LPS2 down in these oil ports just to make sure it was lubricated, and the control stick was basically done. Little did I know, it had to come back off. Other than that, there's not a ton to talk about when it comes to the control stick. I am gonna either get a grip that has a push to talk and maybe some other things like autopilot disconnect, a few other things that I could potentially do there. I'm really thinking about turning that on a lathe myself out of a piece of wood that is pretty sentimental to me. So I'm debating on that. I'm gonna have to figure out as I go into the avionics how to run a push-to-talk wire up through this thing. As a matter of fact, that's something at Sun and Fun. I'm planning on looking at the demo Bearhawks that are there to see how they have done that, and start thinking about some of those items as well. Now that we've got the control stick assembled, let's jump into the floorboards on the Bearhawk. And I'll tell you right now, it doesn't seem like a bunch, but there is a time-consuming process to installing these floorboards. Okay, so I'm back in the hangar today getting started on the floor panels, and I figured out that I messed up yesterday. So I found my floor panels. They were in the box. It's over there that holds the door, sheet metal, I think the boot cowls inside of it and some other stuff. But the panels are labeled, and they show you where certain things go in the companion. I've got the under the rear seat, under each pilot seat, under kind of right behind the foot pedals, and then one that goes under the control stick. And yes, I said under the control stick. So yeah, I've got to take that all apart and reinstall it. Fortunately for me, I was able to text Virgil and figure that out. Basically, I've got to remove what I did previously and slide this down into position, mark it from the bottom, drill those holes, and then I can place that back on top. Not too big of a deal, but definitely more than what I thought I was going to be doing today. And I did learn that the panels stack on top of each other from front to back. So I'm actually not even going to take the control off right now. I'm going to start with the aft or the very back panel and work my way forwards. I have heard that these can be flimsy, and there's a lot of like oil canning, or there's a lot of noise that you can hear from them. I think I'm going to put like a rubber strip between the frame and the panels to prevent the noise. But then I also think that if I do this correctly, they should be sturdy enough for what I'm doing. I'm debating building a carbon fiber floor panel, but if I do that, I'm gonna start by cutting, fitting all of this in, and then I'll just use these as templates for any future floor frame that I build. So yeah, that's what we're doing today is instead of moving on to something else, we're actually going to do the floor panels, which will take me literally all day probably to get just the aft one done. I am using the nut plates that are the K1000s, and then I'll just screw into those with the number 6 screws that I currently forget what they are. It is cold, so I'm going to turn the heater on, and I'll be real audio you guys. The first thing I did was make sure that all of the floorboards were going to sit flat. There were a handful of spots that the frame itself stood proud against the floorboard, and I had to, either using a tin snip, Dremel tool, or even just a plain old file, trim a little bit of the floorboard back to get it to set flush against the surface. Next, I marked the center of all of the tabs that you see on the frame itself. This is where I'm going to be installing K1000 nut plates that I can use to remove these floorboards with screws. Now, I know a ton of different options or styles of floor attachment has been talked about in the forums. I've even talked with Jay, who made the beautiful Bearhawk Companion that I've kind of showed in previous videos on this channel. and he used some kind of like a tab that just attaches very quickly. And I will say, after doing probably 10 hours worth of drilling of these holes, breaking drill bits, and all kinds of other frustrating things, I would have considered maybe doing something a little bit different. But I had the nut plates, I had the kit, so I just took my time and drilled these holes out, and then set up and drilled the nut plate holes as well. One note of caution: this is steel, so I learned this the hard way. The drill runs better at a lower power setting. In the case of the DeWalt that I'm using, that was like a 1, the number 1 rather than the number 2 position. But it takes forever to drill these, so make sure you've got some oil for the bit. You take your time, and you're probably going to need about a half dozen of the drill bits to get through this process without just absolutely losing your mind, because you're going to break a handful of them. All right, so I've got 3 of the panels in, the large one here in the back, which took by far the longest. Then pretty quick, I've cranked out these 2 under the seats. And now I've got to remove the actual yoke itself, the control stick assembly, and then drill through the panel, through the holes that those bolts are gonna go through, and then reassemble all of that after I've got, you know, everything nut plated and installed. So unfortunately, I didn't realize that before I got started, so now it's time to take that apart. One of the things that, oddly enough, I kind of struggle with on this build is figuring out what the happy medium is on what all to show and what not to show. I mean, basically, this is the exact same thing I did on those aft floorboards. Mark, drill, and install a nut plate. But I do feel like it showcases the flow that I go through, and then it's just kind of my story on how I built this aircraft. As well as some of the problems I run into, like figuring out how in the world this fuel selector support goes into the aircraft. I feel like that is true to me, true to this story, and after about 20 minutes of looking at it, looking at videos online, as well as honestly talking to Virgil, who sent me a wonderful image of how this thing installs, I finally figured it out, and I started assembling my fuel selector for the Bearhawk Companion. Now this is the Newton fuel selector. I believe this is an additional optional item that you can buy. I personally recommend it. I just transferred the holes for this thing onto a piece of sheet metal, and then just roughly ballparked where that needed to go inside of this channel, so that I could tap the holes and then drill it out, and then finally step it up with a step bit to final size. These are AN3 bolts that come with the gascolator, and these will screw down into the top of the gascolator and then be secured with 32 thousandths safety wire. Then a AN fitting will go from the gascolator to the fuel valve to allow fuel to pass through this, and this is the lowest point by far in the fuel system. I will be installing the fuel lines in the next few videos, so make sure you stick around for that. They're extremely simple to do, but it does take a little bit of maybe prior knowledge to successfully install the main 3/8 inch fuel lines on this aircraft. So while I'm installing these AN fittings, I'm using a little bit of thread sealant. It's actually the same stuff that we used back on our video where we put the fittings into the fuel tanks themselves. I went ahead and did this just so that way I had the extra benefit and protection of having sealant in the system. I have heard people say that this can break off and maybe clog an injector or something. I don't foresee that being a problem, especially with the gascolator right there. As well as, I'm planning on flushing this for quite a while, and I will likely have an inline filter on the engine side of the firewall that I also use to sort of catch contaminants. You know I'm going to be proud of the safety wire if I'm leaving the full thing in here. When I went to install the riser that sort of supports this fuel valve, I realized it is about 1/4 inch too tall. I had to compress it just to get it to slide under the fuel selector itself. And I do not like the way that it is kind of compressing down. It's putting pressure on that AN fitting. So this is something that I'm going to take another piece of metal, go down to the school, and using our metal brake, I'm going to bend up a new fuel valve support. I then marked where that fuel valve support was and cut it out with a Dremel tool using a metal cutting bit here. Make sure to wear a mask. Those aluminum shavings would be a nightmare in your lungs. So just make sure you're being smart here, using some PPE as necessary, and yeah, also make sure you measure twice and cut once. Well, a little less than ideal right there. Even though I am going to make a new one of these, I went ahead and marked where the holes needed to go just so I could make this into a full-blown template. So I will take this and lower it 1/4 inch, and then I'll already have the screw holes physically marked with, as holes, to be able to transfer those onto the new support. All right, so I want to share something that I've not mentioned it. I've not really been bringing it up. I have a members page, whatever you want to call it, for the channel. It's $1.99 a month, I think is what it is. And I've never said anything about it, and yet I still have 3 people that have gone above and beyond just subscribing or whatever and have joined that membership page. And first off, I want to thank those of you that have, those of you that are considering doing it. That is baffling to me that somebody wants to directly support what I'm doing here in a way, which it's still just the thought is amazing. So I completely understand that it makes sense for a company to potentially invest in this, something like Aero Creeper or Aircraft Spruce, who I've partnered with, and I'm being selective about who I'm partnering with. But quite frankly, it's a little bit amazing that a company would even want to reach out and say, "Hey, you're doing such a good job. We want to send you a product, or we would like to partner with you on this build." But I was trying to figure out a way to incorporate those of you that have made that decision to financially support, even in some small capacity, this build. So this is what I've come up with. For the duration of the build, until I'm doing test flight or whatever, if you join the channel and join as a member of the channel, and I'm only going to have the one level, it's going to be $2 a month, half the cost of a cup of coffee at Starbucks, it's nothing. But for those of you that are doing that, just to show my gratitude, I've decided to put your either handle or name, whichever one makes sense. El Captain 67 is somebody. He's been with me for 3 months now, so thank you, sir or ma'am. But I've decided to go ahead and add the names to the floorboards of the Companion, and they'll stay permanent. So underneath the floorboards, I'm going to just keep up with the names of everybody that has joined the channel as a member and memorializing their support along this journey, just in some small capacity, some small way to say thank you. I appreciate that. I completely understand that there's absolutely no reason for you to do that. There's really only a minor amount of benefit that you're going to get from that in the select videos that are kind of not public, that they're for those individual channel members. But I just want to say thank you to those of you who have done that. It means a lot to me, even though it's, just a handful of bolts here and there for the airplane. So I appreciate that. Let's get back to the floorboards and we'll get them wrapped up here pretty quick. I'm going ahead and installing this floorboard and just securing it with some screws. I didn't fill all of them out, and I have prepped the additional floorboard that goes up to but just shy of those brake pedals and rudders there. The reason I haven't screwed this in all the way is I know this has to come back out for several things. The fuel lines have to come in from the sides, and I'll end up having to notch the floorboard to get those to that gasculator, as well as I've got a handful of ideas about how to seal some of these holes up that I am going to be working on in future videos. Those rudder pedals and brakes I'll discuss in either the next video or the one after that. I'm honestly just waiting on Cleveland to send me the kit for the aircraft. I've got one on order through them. They'll be sending me that hopefully this week. I've been waiting on it for about 6 weeks now, and that's why the aircraft has not been put on its gear yet. All of the stuff that I've covered today is in the first part of the Legacy manuals. If you go under the build manuals, under the resource tab at the very bottom, and it's in the first, I think it's like part 1 of the Legacy manual. With the longer days ahead and warmer weather, it's been fun to have the kids floating around the hangar while I have been working on the aircraft, and to even get them involved with a couple of the items, like fetching a Clico here and there, or just explaining what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I never expected to be able to do something like this and to get to do it with my kids here on the farm and have them grow up with this experience and these memories and some footage that I'm probably not going to share quite often here, but here's an example of that. Took a little break just to spend some time with my kids down in the hangar, and I know it's memorable for them, but it's memorable for me as well. Right here where these back panels meet together, there is a cable that we'll cut through for both the flaps and the ailerons. Really didn't know what to do, so I've just marked the edges of where the panel juts across, and I'm going to bend this up with the metal brake at school. I'm very fortunate to have a 4-foot brake down there that I am able to access at any time, so I'll take these down there the coming week and bend those. Getting these floor panels installed is a very small part of this entire build, but man, does it really start to look and feel like an aircraft. It was super exciting to get everything fitted and put into place, and now it's time to disassemble the whole thing. So those that I haven't done, I'm about to nut plate with the K1000 nut plates, and the rest of it I'm just going to leave off for the time being, just so that way I have easier access to the pulleys that will go in underneath the floor for the flaps. I know I showed that in the last video, but this is actually when I did that. It made a little bit more sense to do the flaps right after the ailerons instead of these floorboards. Now I'm going to go through and drill all of these holes, and again, just take your time because it is super frustrating when something like this happens. Due to the nature of the control stick going through that floorboard that sits underneath it, I elected to go ahead and leave it installed. Everything else came out, but I did have to actually transfer the holes from the control stick tabs up to the main panel. So I did that by marking from underneath and putting I think it was a tire that I set on top of it, and just waiting it to do a pilot hole, and then using these step bits to drill through the top down. That seemed to work pretty well. I even used some Clicos to kind of hold it in place, and then I finally got an actual reaming tool to ream these holes out, and I am kicking myself for not buying one of these sooner. I got them from Spruce, and this was not part of like the package where they were sending me tools. This is me actually saying I bought this and I don't know what I was doing without it. Every time I used it, the bolt fit perfectly the next time. No more trying to twist it in or get it in mechanically, encouraging it to go through the hole just because it fit perfectly from here on out. That's actually important because the plating on these bolts you can strip off, and then the whole corrosion preventive part of the hardware has been removed. So not only is the reamer, makes your life easier, but in my opinion, it's something no builder should do without now that I've used it, because of how much it keeps you from destroying the protective coating that is supposed to be on your hardware. It's kind of just a candid, honest mistake on my part. I should not have been installing stuff without one. Now that I have it, life's a lot better and a lot easier. It may not seem like it, but to me, these floorboards are probably one of the most important things people will see getting into the aircraft and I'm going to experience and touch every time I fly. Really, both of the items today, the control stick that we just got done looking at and these floorboards, are absolutely critical aesthetically. So there was a lot of thought that went into how I'm going to do this, and because it is such a high stakes component, I'm going to use the metal that was sent to me for the floorboards as more or less a template and install it as is. But the goal would be to one day potentially create a carbon fiber flooring that is very lightweight and very strong, that would help reduce the weight of the aircraft and then ultimately give me some really good looking floor panels in this bird. All right, so we've got the control stick in. It's not actually attached right now, so that way I can remove it, because the couple of issues that I did mention in here, this bracket, I'm gonna actually redo this to just get the joggle a little bit lower, so that way there's not pressure on that AN fitting that's connecting the gasculator and the fuel selector. I have got to figure out this situation. I think what I'm gonna end up doing is putting some nut plates along the edge here and just running basically just a piece of metal that I can screw into this and then remove if I ever need to take this out for whatever reason. I am probably going to somehow fabric or actually I think what I'm gonna do is at Sun and Fun, I'm going to go over to the Bearhawk and figure out how in the world they cover this. Like, I don't know if they're attaching to these structural tubings right here or what. I've looked at photos of all kinds of different aircraft, but I've kind of got to figure out what I'm doing here, because right now, I mean, it's going straight into the belly, and I don't want that, obviously. You know, you can drop your phone, it'll be gone if that happens on this setup currently. Thank you for those of you that have joined as a channel member, and I'll see you in the next one.